Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the British Columbia Museums Association webinar. My name is Anissa Paulson, and I will be your host for today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the BCMA offices are located on the traditional lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live and learn here in mutual respect and appreciation. We also recognize the traditional lands of the many nations across British Columbia where the work of the projects described in this webinar has been carried out. Today's webinar topic is Making the Case for Your Museum, Advocacy Strategies That Work. And it's presented, there you go. It's presented today by Stephanie Halapia. And Stephanie is presenting today's workshop as a member of BCMA's Advocacy Committee. Many of you may already be aware that this week is BC Museums Week, and we hope you are having a great week celebrating museums in your community. We thought it would be the ideal time to present a webinar on advocacy, so I'm very appreciative of our Advocacy Committee's efforts, as well as Stephanie's time and commitment to present this webinar today. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our webinar sponsor today, which is Lucidia. Lucidia is a software solutions company based in Richmond, BC, and they develop collections management software systems that are suitable for libraries, archives, and museums, both large and small. Lucidia's motto is redefine how knowledge is shared, which is quite fitting for a webinar sponsor. We thank Lucidia for supporting BCMA as we seek to share knowledge through our webinar series. As I mentioned, I'm Anissa Paulson. I'm your host for today. I'm also BCMA's program officer. If you are having technical issues, please call or email our office. Vanessa, our operations manager, is standing by to assist. Or feel free to send me a text at 778-535-4305 if you're not able to hear us at the moment. So a bit of housekeeping again before we begin. Hopefully you're all able to read this slide and hear me talk. Again, just please call our office if not. Throughout the webinar, if you have a question or comment for the presenter, just use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. It may be hidden, so you may have to hold your mouse either at the top or bottom of your screen, and the feature menu will emerge. If you type in your question to the chat box, I can read your comments or suggestions out to Stephanie, our host. And Stephanie does encourage you to feel free to ask questions at any point during the presentation. It's not necessary to wait until the end. Lastly, Stephanie has a lot of great information for us today, so we expect this webinar to take the full hour. And Stephanie has also mentioned that she's available to stay past 1 p.m. if necessary. And at this time, I'd also like to mention that we have 3 other special guests online for today's webinar. We have Lindsay Foreman, who's the manager curator of the Agassiz Harrison Historical Society and Museum, Keir Westby, the curator of Bulkley Valley Historical Society and Museum, and Sarah Benson-Lord, the manager of the Trail Museum and Archives. These 3 are BCMA members, and they're also here to answer questions during the question and answer session and share their experiences with you. They have each very positive experiences to share and advice on effective advocacy, so we're excited to have them participate as well. Okay, so this month's presenter is Stephanie Halapia. As I have already mentioned, Stephanie is a member of our Advocacy Committee, and in her spare time, she's also the executive director of the Gulf of Georgia Cannery, located in the historic village of Steveston in Richmond, British Columbia. Formerly the director and curator of the Nisga'a Museum in the Nass Valley, Northwest BC, Stephanie moved to BC 3 years ago to take up the directorship of the Nisga'a Museum. She was following her passion for museum administration and leadership, curatorial work, and Indigenous social issues. Stephanie is enthusiastic about the role of museums in the shifting cultural landscape of the province and the country, and bringing awareness to the importance of the arts and cultural industry and the power museums carry to create lasting social change. Stephanie believes in the march towards a more sustainable museum model, which focuses less on collections and more on making connections and championing accessibility for diverse audiences. She's a great advocate for the power of museums, and so without further ado, I would like to turn this webinar over to Stephanie. We're very excited to have you with us today, Stephanie. Thanks very much for your time.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Anissa. So we just need to switch ourselves over.
Oops. I started my video, which is wrong. I want to start your video. Are you able to start your own video there, Stephanie, or I'm not getting? I'm not able to click on it.
Mine just says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, okay. Now there's me, which we don't want. There we go. Try that.
Aha, success.
Okay, thank you everybody for your patience.
All right, and then we just need to switch screens. If you can just give me that option there.
You should be able to, oh, there you go. If you go up to the share button, you should be able to share your screen.
Here we go. Aha. Does it look okay on everyone's end?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Anissa, for your lovely introduction. And I'm very excited to take everyone through this webinar today. I'm going to try to get through the slides relatively efficiently, so we have some time to do questions and answers. But of course, if there's anything burning, like Anissa said, just let me know. And I do believe, Anissa, that these slides will be available after the webinar for the audiences. So hopefully that if there is anything that misses you, you can grab that later. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about not only what is advocacy and why it's important, but tips and strategies for your organization moving forward to actually create a basis of advocacy in your organization and build relationships with the people who are going to be your champions in the political and private sectors. So I love advocacy because I think that our museum sector and GLAM sector is awesome. And I think we need to talk about it more. And I think that we don't talk about. And advocacy is this sort of big, scary thing, but it is actually one of the most important things to ensure that our sector has a long and powerful future. So what is advocacy? Well, as you can see here, there's a fun and huge definition about what advocacy is. But you know, to break it down, advocacy is relationship building. It's remembering that our work is important and the work that we do should be a focus for politicians and big figures in private sectors. And in order for us to do that, we have to be heard, we have to build support, and we have to create a more solid future through collaboration. So you can see that in the definitions, there's a few things that are highlighted here. So like I said, relationships, that is the basis of advocacy. You just have to think about it as relationship building. So whenever you hear the word advocacy, think relationship building. It is also about recognition. So making sure that the important work that not only our sector does as a whole, but that your organization is doing is highlighted and a focus of, you know, your local relationships, your provincial relationships, your national relationships. And advocacy is also a resource. Advocacy builds relationships which connect us to bigger resources than we would normally have, you know, in our own organizations. So advocacy itself builds us relationships, brings us recognition, and gives us resources. So it's one of those things that seems really big. It's actually kind of simple and small, and we can think about it in a way that is approachable. It is about becoming partners. So what is a successful partnership? A successful partnership is a shared understanding, as you can see, of the importance of the museum and the desire to see it succeed. So that's kind of really the kind of key point that we're going to talk about during this webinar, is making sure that you are creating support through the desire for your organization to succeed. So this is more than just support, a photo op or checking a box. These are committed relationships where, you know, the people that you're building these partnerships with are just as invested in your future as you are as a, you know, or leader of the organization or a volunteer, or however you are a part of your GLAM sector organization. So how do we get that? How do we get that strong desire to succeed, this mutual desire to succeed? Well, we get it through a strong engagement in the museum. One of the best things I was ever told was, if you ask for money, you're going to get advice. And if you ask for advice, you're going to get money. And that harkens to that needing that relationship first, that basis of mutual commitment, that community engagement. That's what's going to get you more resources, more funding. Whereas if you just are going out without and asking for funding, you're going to get advice. And this can take on many forms, as it says, charity or strong commitment in the museum. It's not just financial support, but it's also in-kind support, resources sharing. We often think about relationship building as a mean to an end, financial or otherwise. But it is about creating that cross-connected, sector map or web that we can all, have support, and through different organizations, create better experiences for the people who engage in our spaces. That picture, for example, is just of the Pull the Net Festival here at the Gulf of Georgia Cannery, of the Eagle Connection dancers dancing for our visitors and our audiences, and creating a new shared cultural experience together. And it also is about clarity and accountability in the partnership. So in order to be a true partner, we of course have to be upfront and honest, and we have to be accountable, and we have to have all of our ducks in a row. So when you are, engaging with different organizations, whether it be the organization, we really need to make sure that we're building partnerships based off of clarity, accountability, and that strong desire to succeed. So, what are a few challenges to, creating these amazing partnerships that we all want, to make our museums better? The lack of interest. Sometimes either the general public, politicians, don't share the same sort of enthusiastic interest in museums as we do working in the sector. So we always have to remember that we have to sometimes create that interest if it's not already there. And of course, one of the biggest challenges for advocacy, is I've just spent the past couple of minutes talking about the importance of relationships, is if you don't have those relationships already, or they're weak, or perhaps they've suffered, especially in reconciliation and relationships with Indigenous groups, suffered a difficult past. So you have to work through that. You have to build those relationships before you even get to the asking part of the advocacy equation. There's also challenges with community engagement and relevance. Like sometimes our community isn't necessarily on board with what we're doing, or perhaps the community desires a different outcome, event, or program from our organization, one of which we know either can't be funded or can't be done. There is also, across Canada, often a pervasive low knowledge and acceptance of the benefits and impacts of museum arts and culture. So I know I come across that a lot when I'm meeting with politicians, and I'm sure that we have that sort of shared sense here in this webinar and in our community, that sometimes people don't really understand how important museums are, or they think that museums should be very low on the list of priority for public funding. And that's an optics problem that we're all working to change. And of course, one of the biggest ones is different opinions on how to spend public money. We know that there can be very vocal detractors, and the voice of one can sometimes drown out the quiet voices of the many, which is why, having a voice and being heard and demonstrating the importance of your work is very, very key to the success of advocacy in your organization. Of course, these challenges can seem insurmountable, but it is really about committing to the process of advocacy and the process of building relationships. And, as a part of that, you're coming up against all these other challenges that are addressed as you're building these relationships. Another really important thing to think about when we think about advocacy is really understanding the common funding models in our industry. Now, of course, each organization is different, and really understanding your funding model and how it compares to other folks in the industry can be really integral to your discussions with politicians and other figures. People about the funding model of museums, and often think museums either have all the money, which always just makes us laugh a little, or that we have no money and we don't need any more money, and it's a whole thing. Of course, we do have I'd sort of say the three most popular funding models is municipally owned and operated. So this is, of course, is a museum that is municipally owned and funded. And often your main advocacy is with your municipality, with your mayor and your councillors. There are non-for-profit societies that own and operate the museum, and they may receive grant or operational funding through like the British Columbia Arts Council, the Museums Assistance Program. So often your advocacy is, again, with municipalities, but also with provincial and national organizations to get enough funding to keep the lights on, which we have all come up against. And then there's also these sort of weird off hybrid models, and I'll use the Gulf of Georgia Cannery National Historic Site as a kind of example of that. We have federal funding, but we are not completely federally funded. We are only partially federally funded, and the rest of it is made up by the society, which in itself is a non-for-profit society that owns and operates a federally funded provincial site or national site. So there can be a lot of different ways that museums get money, and understanding and being able to answer the questions on how museums get funding can be, critical to having those conversations about funding with politicians. Now, before I move on to advocates and partners, just if there's anything that my co-presenters wanted to bring in, feel free. Any questions, Anissa, in the chat box?
No questions yet in the chat box. And
Okay.
for any of the presenters, if you do want to, if you do have something to say, if you feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself. I think you all have power to do that at any point along the way. Okay, go ahead, Stephanie. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Okay. So that just sort of gives us a bit of a basic overview about what is advocacy. And when I talk about advocacy and relationship building, that's where those conversations are coming from. So, advocates and partners, who are your people? This is one of the most important things to identify. You really have to know who you should be talking to, but not just politicians. Your chamber of commerce, your business associations, your merchants associations, other important figures and organizations in your community. It's really important to identify your people. So, for example, here are some of my people. For the cannery, we have a list of important people, politicians, local, provincial, and federal, that we are consistently engaging in, not only to update on our operations, but of course to build those key relationships. We have our heritage minister, Paolo, and our tourism minister. So even though federal ministers don't come to things, we know this, and necessarily they're not even engaged with, a national site in a way that I wish that they could be, it's still really important to send those invites, and the other tactics that I'm going to talk about are, a part of your advocacy profile. Even with these big figures, they are included in that. We also have things like mayors. So you can see the mayor of Vancouver there. The mayor of Richmond is also important. For some reason, we have the mayor of Vancouver, Richmond Council. Oh, it's because he's in the Richmond. And then, of course, we have our provincial minister, Lisa. And then for us, we also have our local member of parliament, Joe Pesciolito, but also, and this is a key thing as well, your people may not just be the representatives for your sector or for your area. Your people may also be politicians who are nearby, people who have been involved with your organization, who support your organization. So for example, John Algag, the MP for Langley, cares very deeply about the cannery and is always willing to meet with us and help us out. So it may not just be that obvious, this is my MP for my area, though I always encourage everyone to start there, but it's also casting a bit of a wider net to identify the people that have supported your organization in the past, are supporting your organization now, maybe have had a relationship with you in the past, and you want to, reinvigorate that relationship or create a new relationship with figures on municipal, municipal, provincial, and national levels. Of course, your funding model, where the base of your funding comes from, is going to dictate the time and effort you spend on building each of these relationships. If you're municipal, you're probably going to go after your municipal people first. If you receive federal funding through the Museums Assistance Program, you're going to be wanting to talk to the minister, or at least sending invites and such to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Just everything, as look at it as kind of an interconnected web of people that are here to support you. What I didn't have pictured are some of our Chamber of Commerce members and our Merchants Association members who are incredibly supportive of the cannery, just because, of course, they are private citizens, so I did not want to take their picture without their permission. And so, you know, when you're looking for your people, you know, start internally, start close, and cast your net out. And identify your advocates, identify your partners, make that list. So once you have the list, there are 3 key actions to remember. Now, one of the sort of barriers for us with advocacy is we often think about it as yet another thing that's going to take up my time, yet another thing that I don't have time to do, I don't have the resources to do, there are only so many hours a day. And I completely appreciate and understand that. A lot of us are working many jobs and wearing many hats, but advocacy is one of those very, very important things that even if you feel like you don't have time to do it, I challenge everyone to find some time in your day, especially when you're leading up to exhibit openings, big events, you know, things like that, to make sure that you've got those partners in your corner and you're consistently engaging them with everything you do. So how you do that? You write or call with letters, social media, give them a ring. Whenever we have anything important happening here at the cannery, we always make sure to invite our, you know, both federal representatives through Parks Canada, but also our provincial representatives and our local representatives. And most of the time we have someone come, not be obviously the minister, but we do have our local politicians and our councillors come to a lot of our events, but that's because we're consistently writing them letters, we're tagging them on social media, and we're picking up the phone. So
Okay, it looks like we may have just lost Stephanie. I'm going to see what we can do about that, everybody. So I appreciate your patience and stay tuned. We'll try to reconnect with her shortly. While we reconnect with Stephanie, I'm wondering if any of the other panelists, Kira or Lindsay or Sarah, if you have anything to add, feel free.
I did, Anissa. This is Sarah from Trail. Hi, everybody. One thing I wanted to mention about who your people are, especially when you're kicking off events and trying to recognize people who have helped you get where you are, don't forget your local media. We have a tremendous relationship with our local newspaper. We're at the point we don't even have to really advertise. We let them know what's going on. They will come and honestly do a great story, of sometimes just a cover feature for us. It's been a really great relationship to foster. So don't forget your local media either.
Really good point. Kira or Lindsay, what about you?
Definitely the media one. I think that's a really key thing. Like our local paper's the same, and partially it could be they're just looking for content, but we'll often just send them what we want it to say sort of pre-written and they'll put it right in to promote things. And that's worked really well. And I was kind of laughing to myself back on the common challenges side about a slide about a low knowledge of what a museum does. I think we often just assume that people who are maybe municipal politicians, et cetera, know what museums do. And I think at times, they're new to some of this and have no idea. I had our local mayor once say that it kind of took him 7 years to really understand what our role was in the community versus other community organizations. So definitely never take that knowledge for granted, that they understand that it's not just that you're not just hosting events and doing those sorts of things, but and I know that's a big focus of what Stephanie's talking about, but the collections role, I think they may not be super familiar with that either. So introducing them to that side of your work, I think, can help them understand that your role is it goes deeper, that there's lots of levels to it.
Great, thank you all very much. And sorry about that, Stephanie. I'm not sure what happened, but
No
welcome
worries.
back.
I actually think that may have been the internet on my end. Of course, the one and only time you don't want the internet to die is
Right.
I just had Heidi reset the modem and we seem to be up and running. So
Okay, awesome.
That's
Welcome
good.
back.
Yes, thank you. So as I was sort of talking about a little bit, is, there are 3 key actions you can take part of. And you can see here, it does show special events, openings, tours, and you can see there's a picture of an event. And when you're starting your advocacy and you're not entirely sure where to go, that's a great place to start. But building a little bit on what you were talking about there, Kira, if you see there, it says invite to coffee or lunch. That's another really great way, past special events, past those one-off opportunities for a photo op, which is what politicians typically, we get the most interest in. I can't speak for all of them, just of course our representatives, but is making sure that you can sit down and speak with, politicians, local, federal, what have you, about what your organization is, why it's important, what it does, what your role there is, what your essential role in the community is, to find some time to sit down and have that one-on-one. And of course, you're never going to get those meetings if you don't make those calls or, do those invites, because often, unless you have those high-level relationships already in place, the burden on you is on you to kind of make those connections and build those bridges. So when you're, thinking about these 3 key actions, if you're not sure where to start with special events, but also go visit them at the constituency's office if you've never met before, to put a face to a name, to talk about what you do. Invite to coffee or to lunch, to have meetings with the important figures in your community. And of course, be polite. I know sometimes, it can be very frustrating if the message that you're saying is getting across, or if there's talk on the municipal level or the provincial level of withholding funding or not getting renewed funding. Well, of course, that can be overwhelming and difficult for us, especially as not-for-profits. Our first action is always kindness and politeness, and moving forward from there. Even small things, if a check arrives from the city, even if you're going to get it every single year and it's funding from the city, make sure that you're sending a thank you note, those kinds of things. So there are sort of 3 key actions that you can do again and again and again and again to kind of start building on those relationships. But definitely, as much face time as you can get in, it is an important part of building an advocacy profile. There you go. So why invest the time? Why take the time when we're all so busy, to meet with the politicians who seem maybe to not have an interest in what you do, who, business leaders who, maybe now, oh, well, they're never going to give me funding. Why take that time? Well, it does work. It works effectively. When you're building relationships, it takes time, but when you do have solid and strong relationships, you've created advocates, partners, and champions in your local, provincial, and national communities, and that's incredibly powerful for the success of your organization. It may open doors that you don't know existed. For example, when we, here at the Cannery, we've taken on a very strong relationship with Tourism Richmond, who's our local DMO. And through Tourism Richmond, they've actually brought through a few different politicians that I never would have thought to ask or to bring through. In fact, the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Tourism was just here at the Cannery a couple months ago because Tourism Richmond thought to bring her through to come see us. As a consequence of that, when I was in Ottawa in April doing our annual lobby trip that we do here at the Cannery to go speak to the Parks Canada national offices, I met with this politician who probably wouldn't have fit me in the schedule without that prior visit and prior, relationship. So because I built a relationship with the nation, they were able to act with a federal political figure who I can now, email and count as a champion for the Cannery. It also provides you with new audiences, allies, advocates, and friends. So just what I was saying, that relationship building is really important for creating new opportunities for yourself and for your organization, and making sure that you're taking that time, though it might seem impossible, to get that advice versus money conundrum, right? To build the advice, to build the knowledge and the understanding of what you do is really important if you want meaningful support across many levels of government and sectors. You must have people that care about what you're doing, and those people who care become those allies and advocates. It can also help prevent issues and challenges down the line. So when you are dealing with municipalities, for example, and there's a budget cut, one of the first places that often feels those cuts are arts and culture. If you have a really good relationship with your municipality and a really great understanding with your councillors and your mayor and the public about what you do, you're not necessarily going to be that first one they think of when they think about budget cuts. That can sound a little scary. It's not meant to be a scare tactic. More so just that, putting a face to an organization, putting a reason to an organization and a profile, an elevator pitch, as you will, is a really important way for councillors to remember, how important the museum is to the public, to the community, the province, and to our sector as a whole. But my number one reason is, circling back to those things, is you're going to create more funding opportunities through these advocates. You're going to create other people who are championing what you have to say and opening doors to maybe businesses, different grants, different opportunities that you didn't know that you could apply for that you had. And, at the end of the day, when all of us are facing funding shortages, that's a really important reason to spend the time to make those connections, to build that face time, to build a profile of understanding and that shared vision of success, that desire to succeed amongst your partners. So making your case, or as it were, kind of demands that you have a tight ship. When you'll remember when we went back to the beginning, I was talking about accountability as an important part of partnerships. And I know many of you who receive public funding already understand and feel this, that you have to show your accountability, engage with your community, demonstrate your impact and your value. That's all very important to how we communicate about what we do, the importance of our work and the importance of our sector. So for me, what I really love to do, especially when I'm meeting with someone I've never met for the first time, is almost to have an elevator pitch, as it were, about the organization I work for, what it does and why it's important, and where the value is. So for the Cannery, I could just say, oh, well, we preserve West Coast fishing history. Well, that we do. But sometimes when it comes to, politicians who are looking at today, they're not really sure how that's going to connect with their values and their voters' values and the public's values. So it's about enshrining why you're special and connecting it to today's relevance, which, it can sometimes be challenging when we are, a small museum or a historical society, and collection care is a really important part of what we do. And so highlighting that is why you're special. So for example, at the Cannery, I like to say that, the Canneries were the birthplace of multiculturalism, and they demonstrate the difficult racial divides. And for us, we're here to champion that multiculturalism to correct those racial divides and to, first and foremost, highlight sustainability and environmentalism through our preservation of West Coast fishing history. So when I talk to, a politician or someone I've never met, or even if I'm talking to someone who knows a lot about us, someone who I have a good relationship with, those are the points that I always fall back on. I reiterate over and over and over again that this is why we're important, this is what we do, this is why we're valued, and this is how we engage our community and how we're relevant today. So we're relevant today because we're trying to champion sustainability, environmentalism, and reconciliation, all things that, our current council at the City of Richmond is very on board with and, very behind. So, something that Parks Canada, our federal partners, are very behind. And so as a society, as we're aligning with those relevant values of today, we're helping to make a recognition, make our case, helping to build advocates. So we've talked about relationship building, we've talked about the resources, and we've talked about, how to, both on the beginning level, engage, but then also how to take that further, how to take that and make it a more meaningful relationship by building recognition for who you are and why you're important. So when you've got those relationships in place and you're getting to the point where, maybe you have grown a relationship with your municipal council and the grants are coming up and you're going to ask for more money, so you're at that point where you're ready to turn those advocates into your champions. But a few things on your end. Before you ask for more money, ask yourself, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Who are you asking for help? How does helping you help them? And who's the best person to make the request? Any ask must be based on need, clearly demonstrated need, but it doesn't have to be project-based. So a good exercise to go through with this is, your operating funding. We are so often trapped in project-based funding that we don't sort of think sometimes outside that box. And I often like to say, well, what is the problem you're trying to solve? We don't receive enough operating funding to, do the important work of reconciliation and environmental champion that we want to do. Who am I asking for help? Well, I'm going to ask Parks Canada because I need more operating funding. How does helping me help Parks Canada? Well, for Parks Canada, in their policies right now are a highlight on environmentalism, environmental preservation and education, as well as reconciliation with Indigenous peoples through the Truth and Reconciliation Report and UNDRIP. So their policies are in line with the problem I'm trying to solve by getting more operating funding. It also aligns with their existing strategies of, wanting to, how they see the site. So they have a 10-year plan for the site. My plans align with their plans, but I need more operating funding to do that. Demonstrating that impact, how do I do that? Well, for us, it's through visitor feedback, surveys, community partners championing us, such as Tourism Richmond and the Steveston Merchants Association, Chamber of Commerce, other places that care very much and want to see it succeed. Who's the best to make the request? In this case, that would be me. As the executive director, I do the contract negotiations with Parks Canada. So going through an exercise like this, prior to sitting down and talking with someone whom you've built a solid relationship for and you're going to talk to about more funding, helps front load any concerns or questions that they might have, and also clearly demonstrates the need on your end, not a want. Even though it is a want, we must make sure it comes across as a need. So compare and contrast to start a chart. So this is also something that has come really in handy when I speak to politicians. For example, when I was in Ottawa this past April, we were there on behalf of our annual lobby trip to lobby not only our local MPs, but also the federal MPs that deal with our sector and with the high-level Parks Canada officials that deal with our funding. So I went loaded with some stats, a little bit about who we are, and the value of, our sector. We often forget, and these are just a few statistics that I pulled from StatsCan. They're kind of old, but it just, kind of demonstrates that, the GDP of culture equaled 48 billion in 2010, which is 3% of Canada's GDP and larger than the accommodation and food industry. The arts and culture industry is a really important industry. and highlighting our value by comparing, our funding. That's why understanding other funding models is important, because it can help compare and contrast and demonstrate the need. And especially if your funding hasn't changed over time, that's really helpful. That's also something that we've been facing at the cannery, is our funding levels haven't changed in 20 years. So we're looking at that statistic and going, our funding levels haven't changed in 20 years, but of course inflation makes everything more expensive, and we're demonstrating a clear financial and viable need for more operating funding. And of course, the impact of our sector really cannot be understated. Arts and culture as a sector is incredibly important. The public care about arts and culture and having a viable arts and culture community in their own communities. Of course, the politicians are caring very much about what their constituents are caring about. So having that public engagement and public peace is important as well. And then another really great exercise that we've done is compare the per capita funding that goes from your municipal or provincial budget to the arts and culture sector. For example, you have a $10,000 funding request. The population of your town is 10,000 people. That's $1 per capita per person. So that also helps break down what can be a very large funding ask into something a little smaller and a little bit more manageable for the people that you're talking to about it. And also public opinion surveys. That's a really important part too. You not only, do you need to make your own case and understand what your ask is, and to understand how, compare and contrast and get those, facts to back it up, but also the public on your side. So this picture is just an example of something that we did up at the Niskin Museum, which is where we asked everyone to take a Post-it and say what the museum meant to them and put it on the wall. It became both an art piece and a survey. Here at the Gulf of Georgia Cannery, we've done things like there was a VIP survey that Parks does every year, and it demonstrated the value of the cannery here in the Parks Canada envelope. And I definitely think that, most people, at least once in their life, have been to a museum, have fallen in love with a museum, or in some way been impacted by a museum, art gallery, library, or archive. And it's really important for us to have that public piece when we are creating these relationships and sitting down with these people who are interested in serving the will of the pub, wanting to become your advocate in the end. And of course, build partnerships and coalitions. And a big hint there, we already have a bunch. So of course we have the GLAM partnerships in the GLAM sector, the British Columbia Museums Association and its members, which are an incredible resource. And of course, working with other First Nations, I really encourage everyone to take that on as a part of your advocacy, as it also helps build towards reconciliation. And, working with, the British Columbia Museums Association, which works with local government, provincial government, and of course the Canadian Museums Association, which works with national government, to advocate for the small museums who might not necessarily be able to afford something like going to Ottawa once a year. That of course doesn't mean you can't meet with your MPs in your own constituencies, but that obviously not everyone has the funding available to do these sort of big advocacy-based pushes. So before I get to kind of the very just end here, there's a couple of things that I just want to leave with for homework. And of course, one of them is to identify your local, provincial, and federal representatives. So for myself, I have an Excel sheet with everyone in it who, I will invite to things, or I will make a mental note to say, oh, hey, I haven't visited with my MLA in a couple months. I'm going to go have coffee with him or pop down to his constituency office and let him know what we're doing and what we have coming up. Things like exhibits and important projects like our library, which we just redid last year, that put towards the stability of our site in the future. Most importantly, humanize your representatives. Often, the politicians we talk to can feel removed, unapproachable. I think it's really important to remember that they are just people as well, and that usually they have common interests. For example, the Parliamentary Secretary for Tourism who came here actually worked in a cannery in Nova Scotia. So because she worked at a cannery in Nova Scotia, she was already in love with the cannery before she saw it, and we had common ground to talk about before she got here. So when I met with her in Ottawa, it was very, productive because it was having a really wonderful conversation with someone who I knew had shared interests. it's really important to take that time to maybe learn a little bit about the person you're going to meet before you meet them, so you can come together on common ground. For me, if I know that a politician is really, really connected to environmentalism, then, you know, that's the thing that I'm championing that we're doing here at the cannery when I'm sitting down and speaking to that politician or that business owner. It's really about finding out, you know, what makes them tick, so you can build those great relationships. Try to summarize the importance of your organization in 2 to 3 sentences, the elevator pitch that I talked about before. Obviously, that's only a starting point. That's not going to connect them with the core of who you are, but it might be enough to get them interested to remember your organization, to remember why your organization is special, which is going to help you really build that core relationship in the future and that contact, and keep that going, you know, well beyond just those special events and those one-offs. And email, call, engage in social media with 1 representative each month. So if you are a very small organization, maybe you only have volunteers or part-time, or you're doing the job of 2 or 3 people like a lot of us in our industry are, you know, even just setting yourself a task of 1 representative a month is a really great way to get started with advocacy in your own organization. You know, we're powerful in numbers. There's a lot of us. We all have really great things to say. If each one of us had a meaningful relationship with any one of our representatives, as a sector, we'd be speaking very loudly about our needs on a provincial and national level. So it might seem really hard, but it's also easy, because remember that you have a lot of secret weapons. We have each other. We have federal institutions with, you know, maybe more connections that you can reach out to that can help open doors on your behalf. You know, we have small institutions that can help connect us with local representatives, businesses, municipalities that may not be connected with the larger institutions. You know, we have each other, and we're very strong together. We also have, you know, collaboration with other partners. For example, at the Fraser River, we just did some information sharing about job positions and structuring. It's not always about finances. Sometimes advocacy is about sharing resources and creating strong collaborations, because now at the Fraser River, their connections are my connections, and together we can be a stronger voice for our sector in our local area. And look for partners and inspiration in places that might not be connected to your mission directly. For example, the Richmond Olympic Oval has a little museum in it, and this is someone that might not be an outright obvious partner, but whose, you know, mission of physical wellness can often coincide both through sustainability and food here at the cannery. So it's not always just about the museum next door. Sometimes it's about the sportsplex next door, or, you know, the Chamber of Commerce or the business next door. And speaking of business, for us here at the cannery, we work very closely with the Canadian Fishing Company, who also works with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So that gives us another federal connection that helps advocate for the cannery, the visibility of the safety and the future of the cannery. Of course, this can be a bit of a rocky road, because there are ethical concerns when it comes to dealing with companies and corporations. But if it is ethical and it makes sense for your mission, who can support the work you do outside of the government? So I hope that that summed up some of the important aspects of advocacy, how to begin thinking about advocacy in your organization, how to build relationships, and if you already have the relationships, you know, ways and strategies to move through those relationships towards funding asks, towards support and collaboration. I really do believe that our strength as a sector is undermined by our not consistent talking to politicians, you know, and business owners, and you know, the public, I think, is really behind us. And the more that we engage in those relationships, we have coffee, we sit down, we make our municipalities, our province, and our government, our national government, understand who we are, why we're here, why we're important, the value we bring, you know, the more we're going to start to see those politicians bringing up our concerns on the floor of Parliament, you know, in Victoria, and on our council chambers, because we're creating advocates by advocating ourselves. So I like to say, you know, go forth, advocate boldly, dare greatly. You're important, the work you do is important. And so all you have to do is take that first step and make sure that the important people in your communities are on your side. Thank you, Lisa. I will open it to any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate that, your presentation. You had covered a lot of really interesting ground, and had a lot of great points. I also liked the homework, and hopefully everybody will take those little bits of homework to heart and work on those over the next few days and years ahead. During your presentation, Sarah and Lindsay both had points to discuss about the accountability, and Sarah was talking about accountability also means measuring aspects of your exhibits, collections, and programs. And Sarah, I was just wondering if you would like to elaborate on that a little bit while we give the chance for other participants to type in any other questions they have within the chat box.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I think we can all understand every town has a museum, and whether people go there or not may be irrelevant. And I think one of the things that certainly we here in Trail have had to do on a more regular basis is talk to council more about what we're actually doing, especially when there's just one or two of you. They see us running around like chickens with our heads cut off, but it's really important to take that time to measure the success or perhaps the failure of an exhibit or a program and learn from them. And I think that's been a really key aspect of what I do when I go to council, is just taking the time to generate a well thought out report that's honest about how effective or ineffective something's been. And like Stephanie's saying, it really shows that transparency. And, you know, with every failure, there's a little lining of success. So it's important that funders understand just exactly what we're doing and the impact it's having. Because if nobody's coming through the door, it's a moot point, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Lindsay, did you have anything to add on that topic as well?
Hi, I hope everyone can hear me okay. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. So I was just noting that here in Advocacy Harrison, we work with two separate municipalities. So we have, I guess, double duty, double work to do. And we have been working really well over the past couple of years with the District of Kent in Advocacy, where our museum is actually physically located. And in the beginning of this year, we've been working more closely with the resort municipality of Harrison Hot Springs. So we've also garnered additional support from them. So we now have matching support financially from both of those municipalities, which is really wonderful for our institution, since we tell the story of all of our Advocacy Harrison Valley, which includes both of them. So that's been a really rewarding experience. But yes, and it's interesting because a lot of the staff and politicians in the District of Kent have been kind of poking at Harrison Hot Springs as well to get them to where they need to be. And that's been really wonderful to have them advocate for us. And even we just opened for the season on Saturday, and we had one of our local District of Kent councillors come by, and she wanted to check out the refreshed museum. And so it was great to have that opportunity to have talk with her face to face. So I did some homework already before you even assigned it, Stephanie. So
Woo!
Yeah, so that's great. But yeah, just being there and being on the floor sometimes. Don't forget, in smaller institutions, we're often on the floor, but not as often as we could be or should be, or maybe in with our volunteers, because you never know who's going to walk through that door, especially in small communities. Yeah, so I think I had also mentioned, don't forget also to talk with your local visitor information centers or tourist centers. We happen to operate the District of Kent's Visitor Information Center here, but Tourism Harrison, so Harrison Hot Springs has their own, and I work very closely with them because a lot of more people kind of go through their doors, even though they're 7 kilometers away from us. But to make sure that they promote us on their website, they have all of our flyers, information on upcoming events. So it's great to develop those relationships as well.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. We do have a question going through the chat here, whether or not it's common for board members to be advocates for the museum to help secure funding, or is it more the role of an executive director? And go ahead.
Sure, I do think that that's quite organizationally specific. In the sense that I see that Kira said it really depends if you're comfortable having your board members speak, and I think that that's really key. For the cannery, we do have several representatives, one of whom is a city employee, and also a city councillor is one of our ex officios. So, you know, for us, we have a lot of those sort of board connections in business and in the city who do very effectively advocate for us and who know the organization really well. But I think where it comes to leading it, if you want to do like almost like a plan of attack is aggressive, but, you know, having that very, you know, coordinated advocacy, you know, policy, or, you know, we are going to make a concentrated effort to build these relationships, should start with staff, should start with the ED, the senior staff, however, you know, whomever is best suited, because they're going to be the ones that, you know, are hopefully going to be there for longer than perhaps a 2-year term board member, to build those sort of long-term relationships from an organization to an organization, rather than just an individual to an individual. Because it is kind of key that, you know, your organization as a whole is building that relationship, and those relationships don't just depend on one person being there and then they leave with that person.
Can I jump in here, Anissa? It's Sarah.
Sure, of course.
I'd just like to speak to that a little bit. Here, our board consisted of, oh gosh, probably 8 people who had been around for at least 20 years. So knew very well the importance of the new museum, which, by the way, we got last year. We opened last year. This went to referendum in 2014. So we had a really good, solid year of educating the public and engaging with the public on why this new facility, which, by the way, is an integrated library, museum archives. So we did have a great partner there. But we did have one instance at an AGM where we presented some of this educational material on how important museums are. And a question was asked of one of the directors who was presenting, and it was something around, have you visited other museums to get an idea of style and design? And his comment was, oh, I don't like museums, I don't go to them. Big archives guy, did a lot of work here, but it just deflated the whole room. You have to be so careful who's speaking for you. And like you say, Stephanie, perhaps just a communications strategy, some of those key talking points and how to flesh them out. Some people are comfortable doing that, some people aren't, but I think it's always great for staff to be sort of heading that front, as someone who would be probably far more up to date on current trends and buzzwords and those sorts of things. So it was one of those deflating moments for me, for sure, to experience that.
Oh, yikes! That is unfortunate, but it doesn't seem like it had too great of an impact, because you guys were quite successful in getting your new museum downtown. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions coming from participants at all? Feel free to type it into the chat box. Kira, you had mentioned in our discussions prior to this webinar the role of CCI in helping you make a case to your counselors. I was wondering if you would mind elaborating on that a little bit.
Yes, so we had one of the CCI facility assessments done 3 years ago now, and unfortunately it's been a little bit unsuccessful in terms of getting a whole new museum, but it has been helpful for us to sort of have that backup and say, we're not just complaining because we want a bigger office space. Having that official federal report to wave in people's faces over and over and over and over again and say, look, these are the challenges we're facing. we are an extremely flammable building, and your community heritage might burn up at any point. And here's a report that says so and says why. It was definitely worth the money that was spent on having CCI come out, which, by the way, is $1,000. We got a local contribution for 500 of it, and I think we put in the other 500, and that report has paid off in spades. It's been really fantastic to have that, and I think as well it will be useful for us in further funding applications, like to Cultural Spaces Fund or a MAP grant or something in future, to have that first step, that it's not just you saying that there are problems, that you've got this other professional backing as well.
Thank you very much, Kira. And for those of you who aren't familiar with CCI, it's the Canadian Conservation Institute, and they can come out to your museum or archive and do a facility assessment. And they provide a very comprehensive report for you to use as an advocacy tool when you may be looking to upgrade your facility for any reason.
One other thing that I wanted to mention as well, and sort of, I think it was something Sarah had said earlier that triggered it for me. If you're not already doing it, and I imagine most places are, when you're tracking your statistics of who's coming in your door, make sure you're tracking your local, regional, and then tourists. Like, make sure you're keeping track of how many locals from your immediate community are visiting, how many are regional, how many are broader area tourists, because I think being able to split out those numbers and even say, like, this many local kids came in classes, we delivered X number of programs, we had this many local adults come in, we had this many regional adults, especially if you're getting any regional district funding. Being able to use those in reports, your year-end reports, especially to local councils, can be really, really helpful to show that, yeah, we had 5,000 people come through the door, but 75% of those are locals. You're justifying that local funding in a really strong way. So if you're not doing that, I would highly suggest it. And it's great too, because it's a great conversation starter when people come through the door. And we train all our summer students that the first thing, they say hi and ask, are you visiting, or are you from here? Or it sparks a conversation that gets people talking, gets them interested in staying in the museum and perhaps making a donation, but it also gives us that information that we want to track as well.
Yeah, and if you're a bigger organization as well, or if you have the capability, you may be smaller too and have the capability to track postcodes. That is something that is becoming quite common, I think, in a lot of our organizations, for that exact reason, that having that visitor profile is very important. And even on, for myself with a national site, last year we were able to demonstrate that over 60% of our visitors were from Canada. And then, Parks Canada feels very motivated to continue improving and providing a great visitor experience at the site, because the majority of the people that we're bringing that experience to are Canadians. So I think on all levels, that information is really key, and it goes back into, having the evidence before the ask, and so that when you do go and you ask for more operating funding, you have a clear demonstrated need as to why you need that funding.
Just one more thing to add. This is Sarah again. One thing we are pressed on quite regularly, especially at budget time, annual budget time with council, is the duplication of services. With a smaller community, council's probably a lot more in tune with where every dollar is going, as it's probably not as large as a Richmond or a Vancouver, obviously. They want to know we're not duplicating a service that perhaps the art gallery is doing down the road, whom they fund also, or that the library is doing, they fund also. So it's really important to stay within your mandate, and don't step on toes of any other organization that may be receiving funding for something similar. It's something we've come across in the past.
That's something that I think I was sort of like nodding emphatically as Sarah was speaking. Something that we've run into as well is, when we used to go to our annual grant and aid nights where we do our presentation and do our funding ask, it often was feeling sort of competitive in the past, as though we had to compete with what the library is doing or compete with what the art gallery was doing. And we've sort of stopped trying to do that and say, you know what, what we do is history, what we do is preserve local history, what we do is make it available, what we do is, and have that really clear, as Sarah said, really clear mandate of what we do that makes us unique. And for us, it was really starting to emphasize that it's the preservation of the collections and making sure that that was really super clear, because I think in the past we had sort of strayed over into tourism and promoting tourism, and it was sort of outside of our mandate, and we were, I think, getting lost in the shuffle, as we already have a great tourism organization and visitor center in the community. So, you know, why are we focusing on what we're giving to tourists? We should be focusing on what we're giving to the locals when we're asking for local funding, and that's that we're preserving the community's heritage, and just really making sure that that's what we're stressing.
That's really terrific, everybody. Thank you so much. And I think that goes back to Stephanie's homework of making sure you have that elevator pitch, and that you're, you know, linking your organization's mission to your stakeholders and your politicians' policies as well. I don't see any other questions coming over the chat box. So I think because we're a little bit after 1 already, we'll say goodbye to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, for your time, and to Lindsay, Sarah, and Kira for their time as well, and for their expertise in this area. We will be sending Stephanie and the other panelists our BC Museums Association swag, our lovely cups here. So stay tuned to receive one of those in the mailbox soon, Stephanie.
Oh, very exciting.
Yeah. And then join us in June. Mark your calendar for the next webinar, which is on Wednesday, June 19th. Filming in your community, making opportunities for you, for your museum. And it will be presented in partnership with Creative BC, so that should be a really good informative webinar as well. If you have suggestions for topics in the future or wish to present a webinar yourself, feel free to reach out and send me an email. We'd love to know what topics interest you, and accommodate your expertise in our webinar program. As well, each of you will be receiving a link to our survey in your inbox, and we would appreciate if you fill that out, because we would love to know what you think about our webinar series, and again, suggest some other options. And then lastly, if you're not already a member of BCMA, just please consider joining us and staying connected. We have wonderful membership benefits, including funding opportunities, free webinar participation, as well as access to all previously recorded webinars, reduced registration fees for our annual conference, and mark your calendars. This year it is in Prince George on September 30th, and we also provide discounts to regional workshops and other events. So more information is on our website if you wish to become a member, if you're not already. And once again, thanks everybody for your participation, and we hope to see you in June. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.